that climate striking. Um, I was backstage with Greta Thunberg, who I've had the good fun of becoming friends with in New York City, with 250,000 people down on the Battery. But mostly I was monitoring the stuff coming in from climate strikes all over the world, because of course there are Greta Thunbergs in every corner of this planet. Not all of them are famous, but all of them are incredibly good at this work. And the number of young people, junior high school, college age, who have stepped up in the last 5 years is the single most important thing that's happened in this whole fight. So I mean, it seems like a long time ago, and a lot has happened in the subsequent year. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that great introduction. So, Mr. McKibben, thank you again for joining us today. We are so excited to initiate this conversation and learn more about your work. So, if you could, please start off by describing what inspired you to pursue climate action, how this has shaped your opinion on the current campaigns for carbon neutrality, divestment, and climate justice, and how do you see these movements changing and developing over time?
Sure. So I started in this work as a writer 30, 31 years ago, I guess, when I was 28. I published The End of Nature, which was the first book about climate change. That was 1989. It was a long time ago. It was long before you guys were born. Um, and so I've gotten to watch this story about as long as anybody else. And it took me quite a while to figure it out, you know. Um, for a long time, I thought I was kind of engaged in an argument, and that the job was to write more books and have more symposiums and whatever, and that eventually we would pile up enough data and our leaders would would act. But that didn't actually happen. I mean, it became clear we'd won the argument. The science was very clear, but nothing was happening. And so a few of us, including, I must say, my dear friend and one of my real mentors, Molly's dad, John Pasacandando, um, um, really started to try and figure out how to take what was an argument and make it into a fight. The oil industry was winning this fight because they had so much money and had so much political power. And we decided that the only way to respond to that was to try and build political power ourselves. Um, and the only history indicates that you can sometimes do that by building big enough movements. 350.org, which started a decade ago, was a kind of first iteration, a beta version of that movement. And it's been wonderful to watch it grow, and even more wonderful to watch everybody else come flooding into this fight, and especially to see Extinction Rebellion and the Sunrise Movement with the Green New Deal and Fridays for the Future and the climate strikers and everybody else now making what's probably the biggest movement in the world. And one of the things that I think people have really come to understand, sure hope they have, is that this is a movement that is about science, but it's also about justice in the kind of deepest ways. And 2020 really helps us understand that, you know. I mean, the most important quote of 2020, tragically, was uh, uh, was what George Floyd said as he died, as he was murdered. He said, "I can't breathe," he said over and over again. And people can't breathe for lots of reasons. They can't breathe because there's a cop kneeling on their neck and because police brutality stifles their community. They can't breathe because, well, because this year COVID is screwing up people's lungs, and it's the lungs of predominantly the very same kinds of people who deal with police brutality. You can't breathe because there's a coal-fired power plant or a gas-fired power plant down the street. And again, we know where those power plants are and whose neighborhoods they're in. Black Americans get asthma at 3 times the rate of white Americans. It doesn't have anything to do with genetics. It has everything to do with the racism that has produced the kind of segregation, residential segregation we see across America. You can't breathe because the wildfires have gotten so bad that the smoke is, well, I mean, across the West Coast, they're telling people to go into their homes and seal the windows with tape so that the smoke can't get in because the air quality is so deadly. People can't breathe because it's simply gotten too damn hot. We had the hottest temperature ever recorded on this planet this year, 130 degrees in Death Valley. um, the biggest heat wave in California history that preceded that epic fire season, when it's that hot, it just feels like it's suffocating, it's stifling. And this is what is happening, but we're still early in the global warming era. We've raised the temperature 1 degree Celsius, but we're on a path to raise it 3 or 4 degrees Celsius unless we absolutely quickly, rapidly, with everything we've got, make this energy transition. So that's why we work so hard around things like divestment, these big anti-corporate campaigns. It's not because absent our work, someday we won't get where we're going. Sun and wind are already the cheapest way to generate power in the world. Given 75 years, that's what sheer economics will dictate that we do. But we don't have 75 years. We have 10 years. That's what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change told us in 2018, that if by 2030 we hadn't made fundamental transformations of our energy system, we'd never hit the targets we set at Paris. And so we need to move with everything that we've got. Now, not all of us live next to pipelines or coal mines. Sometimes some of us get to travel to those places to protest them or go to jail, whatever it is. But all of us live near big piles of money, whether it's pension funds or university endowments or whatever it is. And that's why this one of the realms where this fight has taken such sharp form is in this divestment campaign. Naomi and I kind of helped dream it up about a decade ago. And at the time, we had no idea how big it would become. It's now the biggest anti-corporate effort ever. We're at about $15 trillion worth of endowments and portfolios that have divested in part or in whole from fossil fuel. And it's begun to tell. The Shell Oil said in their annual report last year that divestment had become a material risk to its business, which is good because Shell's business is a material risk to the planet, um, 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 on and on and on. And, 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 and the fight is so important in so many places. I was on the phone on the Zoom last night with students at Yale who are busy pushing for divestment. I was on a Zoom call yesterday with students at Cornell, and we were basically having a victory party to celebrate the divestment that happened there earlier this year. Oxford University, probably the most famous university in the world, divested in the spring. Your sister public university system, the University of California, divested its $90 billion pension and endowment fund last spring, and that was a huge moment. The New York City pension fund is now divested from fossil fuel. So far this year, the Pope and the Queen have each come out in favor of fossil fuel divestment, which I don't know what I guess that leaves us with Beyonce still to get on side. But other than that, we're doing pretty well. So that momentum is extremely powerful. Now, once universities divest, uh, it's really important that they figure out how to invest some of that money in work that needs to be done in building out renewable energy, especially in communities that have suffered the most. Because remember, the iron law of climate change is the less you did to cause it, the sooner you're going to suffer from it. There was new data this week indicating that the richest 1% of people in the world were responsible for something like 50% of the planet's emissions. And they're not the ones who are going to pay the price because they can always find some island to go retreat to someplace. But we need desperately to be hard at work now. Some of that work is electoral. If we don't win this election in November, it's hard to figure out how we make progress anywhere. But some of that work involves pressuring Wall Street, involves pressuring big banks, involves pressuring people like university trustees to really act and act quickly. The thing we don't have is time. That's the scariest part of all this. It's not like other social problems that we deal with where you can win some and then come back and win some more a little while later and things. If we don't win very soon on climate change, then we're never going to win because we'll go past tipping points that we have no way back from, which is why I'm so glad to see all of you not just engaged in this fight, but engaged in the most serious kind of sharp edge of it, really pushing hard. And thanks too to the people at Princeton who I know are in the middle of an epic divestment battle there too. So New Jersey is becoming a big ground for this fight, and we're so grateful to you all for doing it.
Great. Thank you so much for that response. That was really enlightening. And we actually have a few questions in the chat. So if you don't mind answering these. So from
Please.
Hama, I think you briefly
Sorry,
touched upon this.
Morgan, yeah, if I could interrupt just really quickly.
Yeah.
Everyone, you can feel free to type your questions into the chat box whenever. And Morgan will be watching that with her incredible secretary skills, and will then call on you to unmute yourself, and then you can ask your question. Sound good?
So yeah, I think you briefly touched upon this, but we have a question from Nahama, so I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Yes, hi. So first of all, thank you so much for coming to speak. And I was just wondering, what do universities tend to do with the divested money? I know you kind of touched upon how it's definitely important for them to then invest in, green technology. Have you seen any kind of trend? Have any universities actually moved towards putting the money towards something that will further like the environmental movement?
Absolutely. Now, so there's two things that are going on here. One, divestment by itself is extremely useful because it sends a powerful signal to the fossil fuel industry that they can't keep doing what they're doing. So that's kind of the political half of it, and it's really important. But then you're right, that money can go someplace else. One of the reasons that divestment's been so successful, it must be said, is because it's become clear that you can make much more money investing in other things, including renewable energy, than in fossil fuel. And though Naomi and I did not set out to be investment advisors, universities that took our advice a decade ago have way more money for scholarships or whatever else than they did back then. But yeah, people have figured out smart things to do. And of course, one of the things that universities do is take some of that money and green their own campuses, which is remarkably smart from many standpoints, including a financial one. The return on investment, if you go and replace all the light bulbs on campus with LEDs or put in good insulation or whatever it is, the return on that investment tends to be 20, 30, 40%. Because there's so much energy waste. And that's way more return on investment than anyone's getting on stocks or anything else. We just don't tend to think about capital expenditures in the same way that we think about endowment investments, but we should. It's all money and it's part of the university.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next question is from Katie.
Hi, I'd like to also thank you for coming out and speaking about this. So as someone who's been on the forefront of these fossil fuel divestment movements for nearly a decade, you had mentioned also the success of universities like Cornell and Oxford, but what were some of the barriers that you faced with divestment at these universities, or the biggest barrier, especially given our context at Rutgers?
So the barriers are often the same. Look, first thing is, who's on boards of trustees of universities? They tend to be rich people with a lot of ties to Wall Street, especially if you're in New Jersey, because it's just down the street, So they're reluctant to do this kind of stuff. On the other hand, people who are on boards of trustees of universities tend to be doing it because they care about the university and the kids in it, so at least you have their ear a little bit. So it sometimes takes a while to get them to understand. Their first reactions often were, well, we can't do this because we have a fiduciary responsibility to make the most money we can for our university. But that argument's disappeared because it's clear that the worst performing part of the economy for the last decade has been fossil fuels. And there's no mystery to that. There's, since they're causing the biggest problem in the world, there's increasing regulatory pressure on them all the time. And B, engineers at places like Rutgers have figured out how to make solar power and wind power do the same job that oil and gas do, just cheaper, cleaner, better. So they're under huge pressure and they're not going to be making good money in years to come. So that argument should go by the board. And so I think now that it's mostly a matter of just, continuing to put it in front of them and show them how many other people have done it. It gets less and less scary. And we're deep now into the round of universities, for instance, who said no the first time and are now saying yes the second time around. Middlebury, where I teach, is a good example of that, or Oxford, or the University of California, or Cornell, or just Brown, on and on and on down the list of all your kind of peer institutions. Um, so I think that it should be way less scary now. There's lots and lots of investment advisors that know all about fossil-free funds and so on. There's lots of research and data to show that there's no risk, just the opposite. And so I think that many of the barriers now just evolve around making sure that it's absolutely front of mind. Look, every university's got lots they have to deal with right now, especially now that they're having to figure out, how to keep you all separated and masked and behind plexiglass and on Zoom and whatever the hell else it is you're doing. So, it's understandable that other thing, but you have to keep reminding them that the climate crisis isn't going away, it's intensifying, and that time is really short.
And I would like to tack on to that question too, of like considering Rutgers' position and how there was a divestment request submitted, and now for fossil fuels, there's a committee looking into divesting. And so one would be like, is that like a usual first step? And when that first step is taken by university, what is our job? Does it change?
Right. So it is a usual first step by a university, and your job is to bombard them with information so that they know everything there is to know about why there's no financial risk, just the opposite, and how easy this is to do, and how many other places have done it, and why they've done it. And your job is also to make sure that they know that there's widespread student and faculty demand for it. And however, some places there's a referendum or a straw poll, faculties take a vote, whatever it is. Rutgers is a spread out place, especially this year, I imagine. So some of those things are harder. So figure out some ways to just make it clear to them that this is not some small thing that's, 10 kids want. This is something that has big, widespread support and is part of that. I think one way to say it at this point is it's becoming necessary for schools that want to say that they are environmentally conscious to have taken this step.
Yeah, and I want to tack on to that we have a referendum on the 28th of September to the 1st of October. It's going to be through RUSA, our student government elections. There's going to be a question on divestment. And so fossil fuel divestment specifically, everyone should go vote.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's the second most important election of the autumn. That's good.
There it is. Yeah, that's all I want to say there, Morgan. Does it look like Morgan's frozen, or am I frozen?
I can see you.
Okay, fantastic. I think I'll just move on to another question that I saw in the chat. Alex, Liz, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for coming. And you kind of touched upon a lot of like the aspects that would go into this answer. But I was curious, like, what your response is to those who say that a plan for divestment shouldn't be considered as a part of the climate action plan. And they often say like things like it doesn't directly impact carbon emissions and that it might slow down the rest of the action plan. So I was just curious, like, what your response is to people who say those sorts of things.
I think that I think the way to think about it is you're trying to get the entire university engaged in this fight, right? So at a university, the first things that come to mind when administrators think about this are, what are we doing in the dining hall? What are we doing in the dorms with lighting or heating, something like that? That's good. Those are things people should be looking at. What does the power plant look like? Where are we buying energy from? Can we get renewable energy? So on and so forth. And I think what you just have to keep reminding people is that the endowment is exactly as much a part of the university as the gymnasium or the library or anything else. It's just another part of the university, and it makes no sense to leave it dirty while the rest of the institution's trying to go clean, especially since it's precisely the easiest part of all of this to do. I mean, the other stuff's hard. You gotta, someone's gotta go change a lot of wiring and stuff in a lot of insulation. I mean, it has to be done, but it takes a lot of people doing this. All you got to do here is call the investment advisor on the phone and say, sell the fossil fuel stuff and buy something else.
Great, thank you so much. And kind of in that same vein, we have a question from Samantha.
Sam, I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear Sam?
No, doesn't look like she's muted though.
Hmm.
It might be my headphones. Can you hear me
There you
now?
go. We can hear you.
Yep, we got
Okay,
you.
perfect.
Perfect.
Hi, Mr. McKibben. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. So I had a question about divestment movements in general. So at Rutgers University, we have a student group called the Endowment Justin Collective, a coalition working to divest the endowment divestment from fossil fuels, exploitative labor, the prison and military industrial complex, and to support the BDS movement. In February, they submitted a request to the JCOI and they responded positively, seemingly, to the fossil fuel divestment, but not the others. So in your opinion, what is the relation between the movement to divest from fossil fuels and other divestment movements, as well as how can they work together?
So sometimes these happen simultaneously on campus. At Harvard, they're pushing hard for private prison divestment as well as fossil fuel divestment. I think that sometimes it's easier to get the fossil fuel divestment done simply because there's a big international movement around it. And it's easier for administrators to see that this might have, you might be joining in with some large scale movement where the success is likelier. But I think it's going to be place by place and case by case, and it'll sort of depend on what things have people most exercised and engaged on campus, would be my guess. But I've seen places where that's happened. And private prisons have often been one of the things that they've managed to combine.
Thank you. Our next question is from Victor.
I also would like to say thank you for coming to talk to us because I really enjoyed your first comments. They were very, very relevant because me personally, sometimes I feel like I can't breathe with all the problems we're experiencing socially, environmentally, and economically. And sustainability combines all of these. It's a diverse movement, so I'm really happy to see someone doing their part to in these efforts. So my question is, so although there are many companies that do have plans on divesting and would like to switch to 100% renewable energy and net zero carbon emissions, is and beyond this, there are also companies that do not have the resources to be able to make that big step. So I want to know, what solution would you recommend for these people or these companies that do not have these resources to be able to completely divest? And if you believe carbon capture and storing these emissions underground is a viable solution.
All right, let's do the first one. We'll do the first one first. So divestment's easy because anybody who has stock can sell it. But I think what you're asking is, what about people who want to convert to, say, renewable energy and lack the funds to do it? And that's really important. And that's why we also need political and legislative action. That's why that's basically what the Green New Deal sets out to do. That's why it would be an awfully good idea to unelect President Trump and have a Democratic Senate and make some progress here. And New Jersey, under your governor, has begun to make some progress too in allowing some of these things to happen. But you need to push Trenton harder too, going forward on all of this. As to carbon storage underground, it's physically possible to do it. It's at the moment incredibly expensive, so expensive that no one is doing it. And for the moment, the most important number one task, job one, is definitely to slow the flow of carbon into the atmosphere rather than try to take it out. But as the century wears on, we'll probably develop better technologies for removing some of this stuff, which gives us some hope that, in your old age, we'll really be making progress here, but only if we manage to keep things from getting entirely out of control now.
Thank you again. Our next question is from Hannah.
I wanted to say I'm an organizer with Divest Princeton, And I was wondering, something that I met with a lot is from faculty and administrators is that if we have holdings in things like Exxon and BP and we're receiving funding from them, that we shouldn't divest because we can influence their decisions, which is clearly not true. And I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to respond to that.
Yeah, I think the real answer is, ask them, how's that going for you? Because, Exxon, people have been, on their knees in front of Exxon for 20 years, saying, maybe you could let up on the oil and gas and, take up some sun and wind. No, we're just doing what we do. None of the major oil companies has come anywhere close to doing anything like what we said we needed to do at Paris. And the American oil and gas companies, Exxon, Chevron, et al., have done everything they possibly can to game our political system to make sure nothing ever happens. So from their point of view, that's wonderful. They'd happily keep talking, listening to, and I hate to say this, but sometimes like professors and things, being one myself, really love to go talk and hear themselves talk, and maybe sometimes overrate their ability to get other people to listen to them and whatever. In this case, the way to speak loudly is to take your money away and say, we're not playing this game anymore. And I'm really glad to see this effort underway at Princeton. Again, that's really important. And big progress being made at Harvard and Yale in pushing their administrations and electing people to the board of trustees and things like that. So the word is getting out, even at the richest places in the whole country.
Yeah, and we're really excited to be moving along with divestment with Princeton, both being New Jersey schools, being in a similar climate. I think it's really important that we move forward together. So we're excited to help. Yeah, and again, Hannah, do you want to talk about what Princeton Divest is doing today?
Yeah, so today we're having a virtual climate strike kind of, and we're all commenting on Princeton's Facebook page and Instagram, Twitter, whatever you want to do. And we have a little comment that that's pre-written that you can post if you want. And we're trying to get hundreds of people to post. So it would be amazing if you guys that I can post it in the chat and
I put together a little link with stuff that we're gonna send out to everyone, and the your whole blurb is there and the link and everything. So we're good to go on that, and we'll send that out afterwards so everyone can take part in the movement.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Our next question is from Pablo.
Hi, Bill.
Hey.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that many trustees that are on a board are usually very rich. They have a lot of money to they're basically sitting on, and sort of like what Hannah said with that some of these trustees and universities are very deep in fossil fuel companies and their pockets. And despite that, with student efforts, they try their best to get something moving. And sometimes the university does give them designated channels for students and even faculty to talk through, such as task force and committees. What would you say for students moving forward, and what to do, what actions or tactics should they move forward, especially since some of these task force or committees were created not intending to commit to action by the university?
Universities are very cognizant of the fact that you guys are only going to be there 4 years, and if they can outweight you, then they win. Okay, trust me, that's entered their minds. So people are doing a great job of making sure that lots of first years and sophomores and things are being brought on board these efforts so they continue year after year. That's really important. You need to play an inside and an outside game. If there's going to be a task force or a committee, make sure you're on it, but make sure that's not all you're doing, because sometimes they hope that they'll kind of shut you up that way. Co-op efforts. So make sure that they understand that that's only part of what's going on. And so, when the trustees are meeting, I've seen university after university where students make sure that they are outside the trustees meeting, that there are candlelight vigils, that they're sending thousands of postcards to every member of the board of trustees. You don't have to be unfriendly. These are people who are theoretically on your side. They're working together for a university that you both love, on and on and on. But you do have to keep pressing. And one way to do it really is to appeal to that pride in the university. I mean, you want to say to them, I want to come out of Rutgers. I want to be able to be absolutely fully proud of my alma mater. I want to be able to say Rutgers does the things that it says it stands for, that it does the things that its researchers care about and study and work on, okay? And here is a perfect way for you guys to show that you know how to walk the talk here, if you will divest. So there are ways to make it both firm and loving at the same time, and often that really works. Sometimes you just got to get downright nasty, but there you are.
I just want to give my favorite example of our school talking the talk and not walking the walk, and that is carbon capture concrete, which some really phenomenal professors developed at Rutgers, patented it, made a company to sell it, and then we don't even use it. So that's one of my favorite things to think about. And some student researchers did a great project this summer looking at it and looking at the cost benefit, but I just wanted to throw that example in here.
Perfect.
And another thought on making an impact, with student pressure is, so I was in the task force meeting today, which I know there's some members in the Zoom call too, where one of the co-directors mentioned the strategic plan of our university for Rutgers is going to be rewritten, and about, putting force behind the task force, saying anything they want and anything that we tell them we want is what we want to push, and for them to have influence in their own plan, but also that strategic action plan that'll dictate the next like 10 years, and especially as long as this president's here.
Okay, we have another question from Nahama.
So a lot of students at Rutgers, a lot of us live off campus and housing. We all socialize within the community. We all are very much involved in New Brunswick, and most of the time colleges and universities, they don't really exist in a vacuum. They have a large impact on their surrounding communities. So what would you say is the responsibility of universities to the communities that they occupy in terms of climate action, and how can universities work with them to move forward on climate action that is just and equal and really takes into account everyone living in the community equally?
Well, universities have, one of the things they have is resources some of the time, but those resources are always constrained to one degree or another. But they also have a great deal of expertise. I mean, what is a university? It's a collection of smart people who are thinking about things, right? And so that is a great value to a surrounding community. I mean, one of the things that people, and I'm sure they are to one degree or another, but is thinking about is how to make New Brunswick a community where people can thrive, particularly vulnerable people, particularly low income people. And that is a really powerful thing for students to be deeply engaged in the course of their studies. So seek out those kind of courses, and if there aren't enough of them, turn professors, you tell them this is, we need as practical and on the ground stuff as we can be doing, because we are part of this community.
Thank you.
So we have another question from David.
Great, thank you. Hi, Bill. Thanks for coming back to Rutgers.
Good to see you.
Melanie's here. So I have a question about, which somewhat follows on what you were just saying. One of the ways that decarbonization could go at Rutgers in terms of operations is to generate solar, possibly wind power as well, and provide resilience through microgrids to the surrounding 3 very poor towns in New Jersey. And we're at risk of hurricanes. You are too a little bit in Vermont, but it's worse in New Jersey. So to be a node for resilience here, I want to know what you think about that, and if there are any models out there for for anybody serving as nodes of solar powered resilience nodes?
I think that's a brilliant idea. And I think that it helps really get out one of the things that we've got to start talking about, which is, look, yeah, the single biggest job is to prevent as much climate damage as we can and as much, keep the temperature as low as we can. But this cat's already partway out of the bag, and there's going to be huge trouble, including from hurricanes. I mean, we're currently, on Hurricane Beta? We've gone through the Roman alphabet and we're in the Greek alphabet now for hurricanes this year. That kind of damage is going to be very, very real. And what we need is systems designed for a kind of solidarity in survival, not for the richest people in the, whatever, to be able to go to their summer house and escape whatever's going on, but solutions that allow communities to survive. And this sounds like a very, very smart one. Taking down a power grid is one of the most dangerous things now that happens in a modern society. And we don't need to do it precisely for the reason you point out. Microgrids provide, and battery backup and the things that are possible on microgrids provide enormous possibility for just what you're talking about. There's a little bit of microgrid work going on up here in Vermont, but I think California is probably providing some of the real fine models at this point.
Just if I can add, Bill, I think the American Federation of Teachers endorsed the Green New Deal. Our local faculty union really led the way on that. And now we're part of a process promoting a kind of school-driven energy transition. So I may want to talk to you about what the Chicago Teachers Union may be able to do in terms of solarizing their schools.
Fantastic. And I was very glad to see what the AFT did. That's really important. Look, the Green New Deal is not going to be an easy fight, even if President Biden is in the White House. It's going to be a hell of a hard work to get this done. And we're going to need everybody pitching in.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for that great question. And to kind of harken back to what you were saying about hurricanes, we have a very appropriate question from Jason.
Hi. So my question is a little more less focused, I would say. So just kind of about, for a lot of the young people that are in the call who may kind of be experiencing their first time really pushing really hard for several different issues at once, be it with protests or doing things at local universities. And it's just very easy to kind of lose a little bit of steam, especially in the face of not really seeing a whole bunch of progress. So, like activism burnout is definitely a real thing. So for someone like you, who's no doubt, seen firsthand how slow things can move and how in just, the change of an administration can kind of take us a little bit backwards in things, what really gives you hope and energy?
It's a very good question. Look, I have I got to say, I have a great advantage. Let me see if I can do this here. I'm just going to point the camera out the window of the car. I live deep in the woods in Vermont, where we're in the middle of autumn and things are really beautiful. And I was pretty down this morning, and I took a wander through the woods and I was better by the time I was done. So make sure you take care of yourself, and some time spent in contact with the natural world, wherever it is, on the Jersey Shore, in a park, under a tree, in your backyard, on the wherever there's some green space on the Rutgers campus, that helps. But what really helps is breaking down the fight into discrete enough, enough battles that you can win some. And that's why this divestment thing is so good. It's now, we've won it at thousands and thousands of places. It's entirely achievable at Rutgers. Even when we lose, we win because we're able to make the case over and over again to people who need to hear it. Look, every member of the Rutgers Board of Trustees is back telling their friends at, the investment house where they work that, all the crazy kids are demanding all this stuff and we better start listening and, blah, blah, blah. But fights like, for me anyway, it's really important to understand yourself as one part of a big global fight. So tune in to like every day I make sure on my Twitter account that whenever there's a good win any place around the world, I let everybody know about it, because we're all working on all this stuff together. The work that you're doing to divest Rutgers helps with the work to divest Cornell, or Oxford, or the city of New York, or the pension fund in New Jersey, or whatever comes next. It all adds up together. And so just understand that you're a part of a big, broad global movement. It's not your responsibility to win any particular thing yourself. It's just your responsibility to be a kind of loyal part of that movement and push forward as best you can, wherever you can, on stuff that will help all of us.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Alexandria.
Hi, Bill McKibben. Thank you for coming to speak with us, and it's nice to virtually meet you. In the chat, I have somewhat of a lengthy question, but for more context. So considering like some information and data and studies showing that, like, for example, solar only like being efficient of like 20 to like 30% versus like a fossil fuel, like a unit of fossil fuel energy. So I continue to write, considering how inefficient alternative energy sources, non-fossil fuels, are to produce like 1 unit of fossil fuel, modestly displace or even just add on, and perhaps not even displace any fossil fuel energy, and don't lower the use of it. Considering alternative energy is not mainstream and subsidized worldwide, in some ways alternative energy is limited right now because it's just not welcomed in those places and faces obstacles about efficiency and requires massive amounts of material, perhaps even pollution, disrupting ecosystems. What can argue against previously mentioned concerns and convince establishments, such as our university, that alternative energy is indeed the right decision? Furthermore, considering sourcing, solar panel production methods, infrequent localization of production and supply, and eventually we can easily imagine that solar energy company can become the next billionaire production site.
So good questions. The good news is that the answers to those have changed a lot over the last 5 years. And as a way to say it, I would say at this point, it's probably not correct anymore to talk about solar and wind power as alternative energy. There's now more investment going into them on a worldwide basis as of last year than there is going into fossil fuel. And we seem, I think the latest numbers are we installed more wind and sun around the world generating capacity this year than fossil fuel generated capacity. So in a way, they're now mainstream energy. The question is, we just have to do it so fast and displace so much. And it's possible to do that because the technological curve has been so steep. So the question you asked would have been a really good question a decade ago. But a decade ago, sun and wind cost about 90% more than they do now. And the plummeting cost of those things, because of great engineers mostly, has been an enormous help. The latest big tenders, bidding offers for producing energy, say in the Middle East, electricity, showed that solar bids were coming in for these giant solar farms at about 1 cent a kilowatt hour, which is the cheapest energy in the world by far. Okay. Now, are there going to be solar billionaires? Probably. There, in fact, almost certainly will. There may already be some. And is that great? No. Is our economic system due for an overhaul? I think so. But I will tell you this, there aren't going to be people who are able to control the world the way that fossil fuel barons can. And if you think about the logic of renewable energy, you'll see why. The reason that, say, the Koch brothers, our biggest oil and gas barons, are so politically powerful is because the profitability of coal and gas and oil is so high. If you happen to control the places, the small number of places on Earth where there are big deposits of coal or gas or oil, you effectively have a monopoly on this very precious thing. And so you can get unbelievably rich. And That's the story of the Koch brothers. That's the story of Exxon. That's the story of Saudi Arabia. You know, their political power is derived from their monopoly over those things. Sun and wind are everywhere. They're widely dispersed. And so there's some of them at every location on the planet. And that's precisely why the Exxons of the world hate them so much. If you think about Exxon's business model, it's, you know, been brilliant for a century. You have to write them a check every month for another shipment of oil, you know. But solar and wind power aren't like that. Once you've made the initial investment to put the solar panels up on your roof, then the sun delivers your energy for free every day. And as far as Exxon's concerned, that's like the stupidest business model of all time. They hate it. That's why they spend so much time fighting it. But as far as the rest of us are concerned, it's not perfection. There's not like we're going to by itself achieve all that we need to do to change the world's economic systems, but it's a reasonable step forward in reducing the unfair power that those people have in our society at the moment.
Thank you for answering.
And on the topic of energy, so I myself am an advocate for nuclear energy, and I wanted to hear your perspective because I support it because it's carbon free, it's very localized in a small area, it's powerful, and that it's not intermittent. And so I wanted to hear your perspective on nuclear energy.
Those are its advantages, absolutely. Everybody knows it's kind of you know, the disadvantages we've always known about, you know, the kind of Chernobyl disadvantages. But I think that the real thing that's going to constrain it going forward is mostly that it's really expensive. The price of a solar panel or wind turbine's gone down, 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 down for the last decade, but the price of a nuclear plant just keeps going up, 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 because it's big, centralized, takes a lot of concrete, takes forever to build, so on and so forth. Now, there are people, and one of my heroes, Jim Hansen, the great climate scientist, is one of them, who think that we're on the edge of a kind of fourth generation nuclear power plant and that soon there'll be small ones that are cheaper and safer and whatever. And if that happens, then that may change. But for the moment, as far as I can tell, it's going to be a pretty marginal part of this. Now, the exception to that is I don't think probably we should be quick to close down existing nuclear power plants that we've already built and paid for. As long as we can continue to operate them with relative safety, it seems to me we should.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. We also have another question from Melanie.
Hi, Bill. Hi, everyone. So the Rutgers Climate Action Plan that the task force is working on right now has a component that we're calling carbon positive, equitable economic development. And the idea is to signal the intention, the commitment of Rutgers not only to do the research, but to actively support transitioning the whole economy of New Jersey as the state University of New Jersey, that's a chief responsibility, but really for the world to move off of a fossil fuel dependent economy to one that's not only clean power, but which is sustainable materially and which is equitable, which doesn't leave anybody out and which works for everyone. I know that's a big, so are there any models out there that of universities that have taken the lead on that kind of thing, looking at the economy and realizing that to build the future that we want, this kind of transition is necessary?
Yeah, well, first of all, many thanks for doing this, and you guys are going to be providing one of the models as you do it. But I think that as usual, probably there's some good stuff to be learned from looking to California, where UC system has been pretty engaged in a lot of this work and has a lot of good research and development going on. And I'd also look at Germany pretty closely, and some of the ways that work has overlapped from from the academy into the real world there. I think both of those probably provide some pretty good examples.
What do you think it takes to make a sustainable economy? I mean, one that, I mean, there are notions of circular economy, there are notions of solidarity economy, but these are kinds of, I mean, where is the in that a large institution can make the micro steps possibly starting in our host cities.
So yeah, I mean, look, I'm the wrong person to ask about where we're all going to end up in 50 years, because in 50 years I'm going to be dead, and somebody else's responsibility. Um, what I think we need to worry about now, right now, is trajectory and pace. And so moving quickly to do what you can, and it's easiest to do things close to home, is really smart. I mean, New Brunswick's a perfect place to operate. It's got a transit system. It's got a lot of built infrastructure. And there are all you have to do is look across the Hudson at this remarkable law that New York City has put into effect about big building retrofits across New York. That's going to be the most exciting work going on in the country in a lot of ways about energy conservation and new development. And so be in touch with them, because the advice and the expertise is going to be very close to hand.
Thanks. And just to add a note to everybody, and your thoughts as well, a lot of job opportunities and the retraining of workers who are going to be displaced by the transition off of fossil fuels and fossil fuel dependent infrastructure. We have a lot of pipeline building in New Jersey, not so much fossil fuels, that making that linkage is part of the just transition. I don't know if the student movements that you work with or whatever have made that a part of their plank.
Absolutely. And this is a lot of the work around the Green New Deal that the Sunrise Movement is doing, is heavily engaged in this. And of course, the argument has gotten much stronger, sadly, now that we're in an economic depression, and we need lots and lots and lots and lots of jobs.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and kind of on that note of working close to home and searching for climate positive economic development, there is that whole working group in the task force, and the action plan has kind of this theme that's trying to be worked into it of equitable climate solutions. And then we also can see what Rutgers is actively doing right now. Rutgers, in cooperation with the Robert Wood Johnson Medical Center and DevCo, which is a developing company, is working to build a cancer research institute and displace 750 elementary schoolers, primarily economically disadvantaged, primarily Latino, all from the New Brunswick community, and move them to a temporary warehouse school for a period of multiple years, and then eventually to a new school site. We don't know how long it'll take to build that school, and it also is currently on a toxic brownfield designated area. So as we talk about equitable climate solutions, we're currently doing that, and there's been a really hard fight. Yes, Alexandria just pointed out there's a protest at 3 p.m. tomorrow for it, but there's been a really, really hard fight against it. So Bill, in your eyes, when we're committing injustices like that, where does that tie into our climate fight, our fight for climate justice, and whose responsibility do we make that fight, so that we don't have to do this and that there's like some institutional change?
Well, look, the climate justice is the rallying cry now, and there's no sense in building a clean world that just mimics the same inequities we have in the current one. In sane public policy, these are the people we would be thinking about the most, because they're the ones who have suffered the most from the current paradigm. So good for you all for doing that work and keeping it at the forefront. And as I said earlier, I think that a perfectly good mantra that unites one fight after another is this mantra of "I can't breathe." We need people to be able to breathe freely against all the obstacles that we've thrown up.
And I think there's another question in the chat as well. This is from Matthew.
Hi, thank you for coming to talk. I've noticed, like, when it comes to environmental issues, in terms of like what kind of environmental issues are covered, it's interesting that the issues that tend to be covered tend to be issues that are just scary. It's stuff like hurricanes or wildfires, and we not as much as stuff like lead poisoning or something that might affect that might not be as, eye-catchingly scary. And the way it's I can kind of compare this with is horror movies, because if you get a jump scare, you can get like a lot of scares out of it, but it just really gets a reaction going instead of something that's like something that's psychologically creepy, like Suspiria. That people might like that because there's a little bit more subtle thing and may not get as much coverage, although there was a reboot. So I just want to ask, what would you, if there are, in terms of environmental issues that don't seem very scary or don't seem as eye-catching as a hurricane, what would you recommend to media outlets and how they cover these kinds of issues? And
so, I mean, media, I mean, I've been a reporter my whole life. Media outlets respond in large part to what people let them know are important stories. Look, some things they're always going to cover. I mean, if there's a wildfire burning down Los Angeles, they should cover it, and they have to, and they should, and I'm glad they are. And a hurricane, crashing into the Gulf Coast, or as Hurricane Sandy, whatever it is. But there are other kind of stories where you have to kind of help make the story. If there's lead poisoning in a community, then you need to get a class that does a study of it and produces a paper. And then that class also needs to run a picket line around the neighborhood and make sure that reporters know what's going on. And it needs to bring people in that, bunch of kids in that neighborhood together to make some kind of statement, because that's the kind of thing that people can cover, and so on and so forth. Never does any good to just complain about the media. We're now in a world where we can make more and more of our own media, and where we can put pressure on where we can provide existing newspapers and TV stations and stuff with stories that they'll cover. If you make something interesting, they will cover it.
Okay, thank you.
And then we've talked a little bit about the kind of inside-outside approach, and also about concepts of, like, if you have a smaller movement, you might be able to get some of those quicker victories, like having just the divestment movement and moving forward. And then we've also talked about joining movements together, right? Like the march this Saturday is going to be joining all these different collective efforts. So if you could just kind of give your thoughts on like technique that you think works, and like how much of that inside of like working with the administration, of doing research, and how much of that pressure you've seen work in your time.
So I tend to think that the most important work is the outside work. But I think that there are I think in a way the answer to that question is there's always people, even within your own coalitions, who are suited to different kinds of work. There's people who really like analyzing things and producing reports and sitting and discussing them calmly. And there's people who really like getting out in the street and causing a little bit of trouble, and that's a good division of labor. And go for it, And I think the more coalitions, the better, the more people who are working on more things. If you show up and support things that someone else is doing, they're pretty likely to show up and support what you're doing, and make it part of the same fight.
Okay, and another thought I had when I was listening to your introduction about your history and going through your starting out as a writer, then climate activism, and thinking about the role of just conversation with, say, like the other side, and having that be an open discussion, because you phrased it as saying you started like that. You started with your book and saying this is an argument for something, and now it's just get political power and do it. And so I guess just more perspective on like the role of just open communication and how to deal with people with opposing views on climate and what to do.
Depends on whether they're people that are persuadable or not. It doesn't do any good to you can just have an endless discussion with the CEO of Exxon and you never get anywhere, because he's doing what he's doing, Same with the Koch brothers, whatever it is. So them you got to fight. The board at Rutgers, you got to figure out, can you bring them on site? Can you work with them? Are you able to persuade them? Are they open to reason and to listening? And if they are, then that's really good use of time. And if they're not, then you got to figure out how to put real pressure on them so that it becomes more painful for them to, to keep doing what they're doing than to yield to you. That's just a calculation of figuring out who it is who it is on the other side at any given moment.
And actually, so follow up to that, you're a writer in the New Yorker, and so and with multiple books. So what do you think is when you're writing, what do you think is most going to be accomplished? And it is getting those people who are persuadable, and how much is that?
I think that the most important job, really, for me and for a lot of people in movements, is not to try and persuade absolutely everyone. The polling data shows that about 70% of Americans recognize that climate change is a problem. They may not quite get the urgency of it or whatever, but they understand the basic story. 70% is pretty good, actually, in our country at the moment for anything, The problem is that not very many of that 70% are actively engaged in doing much about it. So I think the most important job is to try and bring some part of that 70% more fully into the fight. And one way of saying this is, I would not destroy Thanksgiving dinner arguing with my crazy uncle about climate change, because he's probably spent too much time listening to Rush Limbaugh and he's just not going to ever get it, It's all right, don't worry about it. But do sit down with your nice, sweet aunt, who's really worried about what the world's going to be like for her grandkids, and try to make sure that, she's voting the right way, or has written a letter to her congressperson, or whatever it is. Figure out who's persuadable and who isn't.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. I'll definitely stop arguing with my uncle now, even though he voted for Jill Stein. But I think we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up, unless anyone has any final questions that they want to throw into the chat. I have a link with kind of all the action items that we've been talking about, the action on Saturday, information on voting in the divestment referendum, which is so important, and also, what are the other things? Right, the Princeton Divest campaign, they have a big thing going on today, flooding Princeton's Facebook and Instagram page with the same kind of thing. Yeah, Victor, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I wanted to know, how do you vote in this RUSA event?
Yeah, so there's more information on the site I'm gonna link, but it's information that goes out to your Rutgers Scarlet email, and it'll happen around September 28th to the 1st. But yeah, I think we just all want to say thank you, Bill, so much for coming. Nolan, yeah, did you have something you want to say?
I just want to say, Molly, thank you and everybody there for all your good work. It's great fun to be on your team. Go Scarlet Knights. And, I'll very much look forward to joining you for the victory party once Rutgers divests. That'll be a lot of fun whenever it happens. And thank you guys for just pushing hard.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate your time today.
All right. God bless.
All right.
Thank you.
And thank you every single person that came out. We got lots of stuff to do at Rutgers and across the world to have something that has an impact on our climate. And so we have those specific action items, but moving forward, we got lots of stuff with SCA, everyone in the Sustainability Coalition at Rutgers. Every single person that comes to a meeting is just supremely powerful in what we could do with organizing together and showing administration what we could do, and important things. So please just stay active and keep up with all the things that we're doing, and join the fight here at Rutgers.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good one. And see you tomorrow, everyone who is comfortable with coming to an action.
Bye. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye. So I think Bob Kopp might have run away to help his kid. Might have left
that makes sense.
Just want to say good job, guys.
Hey, Javier, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, of course. I caught like the the latter half because I came a little late out of class. But no, really, thanks for shouting out the RUSA referendum, by the way.
Of course.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, it's huge. And literally, like, without prompt, one of the first things Bill was saying was like, you need to show solidarity, you need to show support, you have to have a vote. And I was like, hey, guess what? We have a vote coming up. Like, this is out of under control.
Yeah, of course. That email is going to be going out on the 28th, so the day of voting. That email is going to go out to the entire student body.
Cool.
And then, for the next 3 days, people can vote. And by the way, last night, I successfully changed the bill back to what it was before with the one whereas clause talking about 4-year plan for a renewable energy credit program.
Okay.
So now we've fully committed to it. So we're just wanted to update you guys on that. But thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye.
So I can put people in the waiting room if we
do that, please.
Wait, in the waiting room or when they come back to
Nolan, no.
That's kind of funny.
Sorry, I just have one question. When is the strike happening tomorrow and where?
Sorry, okay. Oh my God.
Also, wait, time out.
So
stop the recording.
Oh my God, yes. Okay.